In this video, we'll build a complete responsive website with HTML5, CSS3, and Bootstrap 4. Okay guys, so I'm excited to release this video because I think it's the best responsive website design tutorial that I've put out on YouTube yet. So my goal for this video is to get up to 1,000 likes. And if you end up liking this video, remember to subscribe and turn on your notifications for new tutorials. Also, leave a comment to let me know what you think or request a website feature for a future tutorial. So now let's get an overview of the website design that we'll be building in this video. The first thing that you'll notice is the navigation bar is going to be sticky, and it's going to be sticky down to the bottom of the image slider before the social nav bar underneath it starts and turns into a sticky bar itself. Then underneath the navigation bar, we're going to have our image slider where we'll add content on top of it, as well as the background color and the button on the first and the third slide, because as you see, the second slide is just going to be the image itself, but here on the third slide, we'll have a different colored background color with a different styled button as well. Then underneath the image slider, this might be my favorite part of the website, even though it's kind of simple, and that's the sticky social media bar, which is going to be sticky throughout the page until we get down to the fixed background image section. So underneath the sticky bar, we'll have a heading section that we see where it says complete website and the underline underneath that. Then this 3-column section where we'll add font awesome icons to display the HTML5, Bootstrap, and CSS3 icons. Then of course, underneath those, we'll have the paragraph text and the learn more buttons in that 3-column section, which is going to turn into a single column layout on mobile devices here on the right. Then further down the page, underneath the border spanning the entire width, we'll have a 2-column section with the heading, text, and button on the left and the tablet on the right, followed by the fixed background image section, which will unstick the social media bar, which has been sticky down to that point. And as you'll see on the right, we'll have the mobile version with the single column layout. And underneath the fixed background image section, we're going to have a new sticky section start with the text on the left and the button on the right, which will turn into just the button on mobile devices. And that section will stick on top of this 3-column section with the heading, image, paragraph, and buttons underneath. Then the text and button section will unstick when we get down to the border spanning across the page instead of the fixed background image section. And moving down through the mobile version here on the right, we'll find that underneath the border spanning the entire width, we'll have a new 2-column section layout, which will take on different widths than the first 2-column section. And beneath that, we'll have this text callout section with the button on the right, followed by the footer underneath, which will take on a 3-column layout and turn into the single column as we see here on the right, before we get down to the socket, which is the dark section at the very bottom of the website. So now that we've gotten a look at the full width version of the website as well as the mobile version, let's take a look at how the different sections of the website will respond to different device widths. So when we span up past 968 pixels in width, we'll see that the navigation is going to turn into the full width version from the drop-down version of the nav bar. And if we take a look at the image slider, we'll see that the content that we'll add on top of it will be responsive as well. So as we decrease the width of the website, that content is going to get smaller in size. Then when we get underneath 768 pixels, it's going to disappear altogether for the smallest of devices. Next, the social media bar will also decrease in size as we span the page down. So it'll start at the 2-column layout at 1140 pixels, and anything underneath that, the social icons will start to decrease in size while they're centered on the page. Looking at the 3-column section, it's going to jump to a narrower 3-column layout and then go to a 2-column layout with a single column underneath, followed by the single column layout on the mobile devices underneath the 700 pixel range. Similarly, when we get down to the 2-column section underneath that, you'll see that at its full width, when we jump down in size a little bit, there's going to be a breakpoint where it's going to get narrower in size, where you'll see the text section change specifically before we drop down to the single column layout underneath the 900 pixel range. Then with the fixed background image section underneath this, we'll have the option to decrease the height and add content on top of it as we're laying out the website. Then for the last few sections, it will be similar to what we've already covered above. So with the Jumbotron section where we have the text and the button on the right, that's going to shift to 2 lines for both the text and the button before we get down to the single column layout. For the 3 column section underneath that with the heading, images, text, and buttons, those are going to take on the same layout as the previous 3 column section did with the font awesome icons where we go to the 2 column down to the single column. And the same will be true for this 2 column section that will appear underneath this, taking on the same layout as the previous 2 column section. And then the Jumbotron where it says visit us today with the blue button, that will be similar to the previous Jumbotron section with the text and the button on the right as well. Lastly, at the very bottom of the website, the 3 column layout for the footer section will span to a narrower width before dropping down to the single column layout at the very bottom of our website design. Okay, so with that, let's span back up the page with the mobile version here on the right, as well as the full width version on the left. And I promise that the rest of the tutorial won't be as repetitive and quick as running through the design was, but let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. So in the description of this video will be the starter files that I've prepared to get us started with the course containing all of the files necessary to build our website. The first file that you'll see here is the 12 website bundle blue file, and if you double click that, that's going to open up this page right here where you can use an image or the button underneath to link to my website. And if you'd like to support my channel, be sure to check out the 12 website bundle pack at my website w3newbie.com, which includes 12 complete responsive website designs in addition to a 3 website bundle bonus, one of which websites in the bonus is what this website design we'll be building in the tutorial is based off of. Now let's get introduced to the text editor that I have set up in the background, which is the free program called Visual Studio Code that I'm going to be using throughout the video. So with Visual Studio Code, if we go back over to my website, I have a lesson on that on the resources page. So if you take a look at the left-hand sidebar and check out the Visual Studio Code text editor lesson, you'll see links to the Visual Studio Code website as well as their shortcuts and the extensions that I use, which include the Eagle Oceanic Next for the color scheme, as well as Live Server, which is the Go Live feature in the lower right-hand corner, which we'll turn on in just a little bit, as well as all of the settings that I use directly from my setup of Visual Studio Code. So once you're all set up, you can open up the files in Visual Studio Code and hit the Go Live feature in the lower right-hand corner. And that's going to prompt Google Chrome to open up index.html, where you'll see that we already have a couple of sections of the website started for us. And the reason that I've included these is because we're going to add sections to the website that are similar to these so we're not repeating ourselves, and I wanted to keep the course underneath 2 hours in time. So the sections that are already included for us will be the fixed background image, the Jumbotron that we see right here, and the Jumbotron at the bottom, but we're going to add a Jumbotron separate from these at the top with the social media bar. So you can leave these sections up or you can remove them by commenting them out so we can just enable them later on in the tutorial, which is what I'm going to do. So I'll just remove the right angle bracket from the 3 different sections, including the fixed background section, the first Jumbotron, and the second Jumbotron. And then once we save it, we'll have a blank page, as you can see right here. So for anyone who's new to the Bootstrap responsive website design framework, let's add some text to the page, and I want to show you how it works really quickly. So I'll add a heading 1 tag here, and then inside of it I'll write test exclamation point. Then when we save it, the live server extension will make it automatically show up in the upper left-hand corner. So now as an example, using the Bootstrap CSS framework, what we can do is add a class here to make our text appear uppercase. So I'm going to add the class text-uppercase, and then once we save it, Bootstrap is going to make our text uppercase, as we can see off to the left. And then one other thing that we can do, just as an example, is I'll say text danger, which will make it red. And then in addition to this, to make it blue, I'll add text-primary. So included in the files as a point of reference is the bootstrap.css file. We'll actually be using the bootstrap min.css file, which takes up a little bit less space when it comes to the load time for the website. But with this file, we can use the find feature with Command F in Visual Studio Code to look up any of the classes that we use in the website. So for example, with text-primary, here we'll have the CSS for those classes with the Bootstrap framework and the blue hex value that's used for that class. Likewise, if we look up text uppercase, we'll see the text uppercase class along with the CSS for that. So throughout the course, I'll be explaining the Bootstrap classes and features that we'll be adding, but you can always use the bootstrap.css file here with the Command F find feature to learn more about the classes that we use. Also, as a quick reference, back on the resources page of my website, there's an introduction to the Bootstrap 12-column grid system. Also, there's a link to the Bootstrap documentation right here, which will link us to their website. And from here, you'll see we're on the documentation page. And we can go down to the Bootstrap components to see things like the image slider and the navigation. Then with the layout, we'll get a link to the grid system, which we'll be going over later in the video. You don't need to worry about looking up any of this information if you don't want to, but you can use them as reference points. Now let's go over what's already included for us inside of the project starter files. First, we'll go over what's included in index.html. And then we'll take a look at style.css and see what's included for us there. So from the top of the document, we have our HTML5 doc type, followed by HTML and the language English, which will span the entire document. And underneath that, we have the head section of the website, where we'll tell the web browser all of the important information for how we want our website to display. Starting with meta char set UTF-8, which is the standard character set for numbers and letters on the internet. Then we have viewport width device width initial scale 1, so the website fits into the view of mobile devices, in addition to viewport fit cover, which is for devices with non-rectangular screens such as the iPhone X. Then underneath that, we have a compatibility meta tag for Internet Explorer Edge, followed by the website title and the shortcut icon, which is underneath that. So if we take a look at how the website appears in Google Chrome, the tab is where we're going to see the fave icon off to the left, which is the small image. And then off to the right, we have the website title, which would also be the largest text that appears in a Google search. Then for the fave icon image, you can use ICO, PNG, or JPG, and that's going to be inside of the image folder, and it's the faveicon.ico file. What you can also do is just do a search for PNG or JPG to ICO if you want to use that, but browsers today can recognize PNG and JPEG files just as well as the ICO file. So if we hit Command B in Visual Studio Code and open up Explorer in the left sidebar, we can go into the image folder and take a look at the faveicon.ico file. Then a good rule of thumb for fave icons is to have them from 40 by 40 pixels to 100 by 100 or so. I prefer to go a little bit larger so they're not too pixelated when they're seen as favorites, because they'll be a little bit larger than you will see in the tab on a web browser. So then back in the head section in index.html, beneath the fave icon, we have a link to the bootstrap min.css file, which will be similar to the Bootstrap CSS file, which we took a look at, just smaller in size, as I mentioned previously. Then underneath that, we have the style.css file, which we'll be working on. Then the last thing that's in the head section will be a link to Google Fonts. So you can get a link to Google Fonts from the resources page of my website in the lessons, or you can just go to fonts.google.com, and from here we can select a font family. So for example, if we just do a search for Roboto, that's the font style that we'll be using, and then we hit the plus sign. Then at the very bottom, let's select the black bar, and I'm going to go over to Customize, where we can select the different font weights. Then what we'll want to do is copy the link and add that to index.html. Followed by copying the CSS style declaration for the font family, which we already have added for us in style.css. So now moving down to the body section of the index.html document, we have a couple of tags set up for us already, or IDs, which are going to be for the sticky sections of the website, as you see right here, starting with the navigation sticky. So this ID will span the height for where we're going to have the navigation be sticky down to the bottom of the carousel image slider. Then the next sticky section, where it says social media sticky, will be the window for where we'll have the social media menu bar be sticky. So as you'll see, that's going to span down to just above the fixed background image section. Then moving down the index.html document, the last one will be the text button sticky ID right here, which is the parent element to the Jumbotron, which is already added to us, and that's the section just beneath the fixed background image window, which will unstick at the border above the two-column section. Then working our way down to the very bottom of index.html, we'll have our script source files, starting with the latest version of jQuery as of the recording of this video, which is jQuery 3.4.1, which is required to run the Bootstrap JavaScript file, which appears underneath it, and that file operates features of the website such as the drop-down navigation menu and the image slider. Then underneath Bootstrap min.js, we're going to have poppermin.js, which is a file that Bootstrap includes with their framework to operate features such as the pop-up modal effect. We're not going to use anything that requires this in the website here, but in case you want to add features from the Bootstrap framework that do, you can use that file. Then lastly, we'll have a file for Font Awesome, which is the icon library we'll be using in the website in order to display the social media menu bar icons, as well as the HTML, Bootstrap, and CSS3 icons. So with Font Awesome, if we go to fontawesome.com and then check out their icons using that link, we'll get to see all of the free icons that are displaying at 100% opacity, or we could do a search for an icon. So for example, if we just do a search for code, we can select that icon. Then from there, we'll be able to click on the HTML for the icon to copy it, so we can move it right to our website inside of index.html. So I'll go up to the top of the page, and underneath the test text, I'll paste in fa-code. Then you'll be able to see the icon displaying, and to make it larger, we'll use a class from Font Awesome called fa-5x. Okay, so now that we've covered everything in index.html, I'm going to delete this heading 1 and icon, and let's move over to style.css and cover what's already included for us, starting with the reset style at the top, which targets the HTML document itself and the body of the website. Then we have the style declaration overflow x hidden for the x or horizontal axis, so we don't have any elements displaying outside of the body. Then we'll also have our height and width set to 100%, which is always good to include when we're adding sticky elements. Then we have our font family set to the Google font Roboto, which we saw in index.html, followed by font size large, which is going to take our regular font size of 16 pixels in Google Chrome up to 18 pixels. Then moving down style.css, underneath the comments that we have added for us, we have some CSS added for the Jumbotron class, which is what's used twice for us in the starter files already with the text and button on the right. Then moving down the document, we also have the CSS added for the fixed background image. So you can change the image that you see there with mac.jpg, and with the fixed background section, underneath the actual fixed background class, is where you would want to add content if you want it to sit on top of the background image. Also, what I'm going to do right now is remove the height that's set to 100% or 100 vertical height, so it only takes up the height 12 rem, which we see with the padding of the fixed background class, and that's going to match up to the finished website. Then moving back to index.html, I'm going to comment out the fixed background section again, so we have a blank page. Then further down style.css, we're going to see that we have some media queries started for us already, where we'll be changing the style based on the width of the website for smaller screens such as iPads and iPhones. And we also have a cheat sheet from Bootstrap for all of the different breakpoints for where we can adjust the column widths and change the layout of the website. Then the last bit of CSS included for us at the bottom of style.css starts with a mobile gutter fix. So basically with the fixed background image section, sometimes with mobile, we're left with a little gutter of white space off to the right-hand side. And also included for us is CSS for the fixed background image section to make sure that it looks fixed on devices such as the iPad and iPhone. Okay, so with that, we've covered all of the starter files and we're ready to move back over to index.html. Now let's go over to index.html and start laying out the HTML for our navigation menu. So before we do that, I want to show you a couple of quick shortcuts with the Visual Studio Code text editor, starting with the period, which we can add a div class with, and we can also use a hashtag to add a div ID. Then with our div ID set, we can add a child element inside of it using the right angle bracket, and then I'll just add our class. Then we can also use an asterisk to say times 5 of this class to have it display 5 times. And inside of that class, we'll have a link with the class link class. Then if we hit enter, we'll have 5 different classes with the link inside of it, inside of the original div ID. So since we already have the navigation sticky ID spanning from the top of the page down to the bottom of the image carousel, let's get started with the navigation tag. You'll also notice that the image slider isn't sliding right now because I turned off the data interval or made it so it was so high that it's not going to slide for now, just so we don't have that sliding in the background all the time while we're building the website. So as for the navigation, we're going to be using classes directly from the Bootstrap framework with the navbar feature. So if we go to the components and do a search for navbar, or you can see it on the sidebar there, you'll be able to check out the different classes and features that can be added to the Bootstrap navigation bar. So let's start with the nav tag. Then inside of the nav tag, we'll have a class called navbar. And then to set the light background of the navigation bar, we're going to use a class called bglight for background light from Bootstrap. And to make our links as well as the drop-down button dark in color, we're going to use their navbar-light class. And once that's set, we'll need to specify a width at which point we want the navigation bar to turn into the full width version from the drop-down menu version. So let's go back over to the Bootstrap website, and I'm going to go to their grid page. So with the Bootstrap framework, we have 12 different columns to work with, and we can divide them however we want across the Bootstrap grid by using the classes here that are set for different widths. So for example, the 700 pixel range is MD and the 900 pixel range is LG. So we would add col-LG and then the number of columns that we want to use. So in this case, we'll be using the large screen breakpoint, and we're going to add the class navbar-expand-LG. Then once that's set, the last class that we'll add will be to give it the sticky top feature, which we see here before it transitions into the social bar. So we'll use the sticky top class for that. Then we can hit enter. And inside of this, we're going to add a container to give our content inside of the nav bar, meaning our logo and the links, a max width. And that's going to be a max width of 1140 pixels since we're using Bootstrap's container class here instead of container fluid. So now with that set, we're ready to start adding the content inside of it, starting with the logo here off to the left. So with Bootstrap, the logos use a class called navbar-brand, and we're going to wrap that with a link or the anchor tag using an A, so our logo image acts as a link back to the homepage of our website. Then inside of our link here, we're going to add our image, so we'll use the right angle bracket followed by img. Then for the logo link, we could use a hashtag to leave it blank so it takes us nowhere, or we could use the same link that we use for the home text here, which most websites do, which would be index.html, so the logo links us back to the home page of the website when we click on it. Then for the image source, we're going to go into the image folder, and that's going to be the logo.png file here. So I'm just going to write img/ and then logo.png. So now if we save it and go over to the version we're working on in Chrome, we'll see our logo show up, and it might be tough to see the nav bar. So if we just change this class to secondary, which is a gray background shade with Bootstrap, you'll be able to see the height of the navigation easily. Then one other thing that we could do in case the logo doesn't display properly is we can add alternative text here. So I'll just write logo. And now if we save it, you'll see that that's going to show up instead of the image. Then we can also add title text. So when we hover over the image, it's going to show us the logo text that appears underneath it. So I'm going to change it back to bglight. And now we're ready to add the next feature of the navigation, which is going to be the drop-down button. So if we span down, here we have the drop-down toggle button, which is going to be sort of a border with a hamburger menu inside of it. And to add that, we'll use the button tag followed by a class called navbar-toggler. And inside of that, we're going to have a span tag to give us the hamburger icon, which we see right here. And that span tag is going to have a class called navbar-toggler-icon. Then once I hit enter, I'm going to drop the span tag down to a new line and separate it from the button. And if we save it and take a look in Chrome, there we have our drop-down toggle menu button sitting next to our logo. So next, what we'll do is let's add the collapse functionality to it. So let's write type, and then for this attribute, we'll say button. Then we'll also add data-toggle collapse. So the Bootstrap JavaScript framework knows to open and collapse the ID or data target that we're going to set for the navigation. So let's add that data target attribute, and then we'll use the hashtag to set the ID that we'll be giving the navigation menu, and we're going to call this navbar responsive. So let's add that element now, but we're going to start with two classes from Bootstrap. So the JavaScript framework knows that this is what we're going to be opening and collapsing. So we'll use the class called collapse, followed by navbar-collapse. Then we can add our ID, navbar responsive, with the camel R character because it's next to another R. Then we can hit enter, and inside of this element, we're going to have an unordered list, which will contain all of our list items and links that we see here for our navigation menu. So let's start off with the unordered list using UL, and we're going to give this a class called navbar-nav. Now to position our navigation menu, we have some options using the Bootstrap classes. So we can position it off to the right, which is what we're going to do, or we can position it off to the left or centered. So off to the left would be margin left auto, centered would be margin 0 auto, so MX auto, but we're going to use ML auto to position it off to the right, which means margin left auto. Now we're ready to start adding our list items inside of our unordered list. So each list item will have a link inside of it, and the list item itself, we're going to give a class called nav-item. Then I'm going to say times 5 because we're going to have 5 different navigation menu links, and we're going to have a link inside of the list item with a class called nav-link. Then we can hit enter, and I'm going to add index.html for the home link. So I'll write that inside of the href, and then we're going to add the home text in between the A tags. So I'll just write home here, and later we'll take care of styling the text. But for now, as you can see, we have our home link started, and let's add the rest of our links now before we do anything else. So after home, we have about, followed by services, then projects, and the last one is contact us. So now if we go back and check out Chrome, we'll have all 5 of our links set here, but we're not going to be able to tell that the home link is any different from the rest or that we're on the home page. So let's add a class called active here next to the nav-link class, and if we check again, we're going to see that now the home link is a different color than the rest of the navigation links. Now let's add our CSS to match our navigation menu to the original. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's resize our logo since that's taking up too much space here and it's too large in size. So to do that, we're going to reference the navbar-brand class followed by the image. So I'm going to copy navbar-brand and go over to style.css. Then underneath the navigation CSS comment, let's add that navbar-brand class and the image. And we're going to drop the height down to 2.8 rem, which is about the equivalent of 50 pixels or so. And the 2.8 rem, that's going to be larger because of the font size large style declaration that we have here for the body. So removing that, it's going to make the content smaller in size. So as we know, that's going to take our rems from 16 pixels to 18 pixels. So now let's set the background color of our navigation. It might be tough to tell, but this is going to be the same as the Jumbotron that we covered earlier, which has the slight linear gradient shade to it, taking us from a light gray to an off-white. So let's target the navbar class in order to change the background color. And once we do that, we can just paste in the same linear gradient CSS from the Jumbotron. So now if we take a look, you'll see that it's going to sort of match up with the white off to the right. But if we change this to the gray hex value of all 6s, we're going to be able to see a clear difference of the gradient. So now with the background color set, let's go back and we're going to change the font size of the navigation menu links to match the original along with some other styling. So with the font size large set, we'll just need to increase this slightly from 1 rem to 1.1 rem to get the font size that we're seeing with the finished version. Then let's make the characters uppercase by adding text transform uppercase. And now we're going to be closer to the original, but let's also space out the letters with letter spacing 0.1 rem, which I think looks really sleek with navigation menu links. And in order to space out or separate our navigation menu links, let's target the list item class, which is the nav item class. So we can just add some padding all around this by adding nav item. Then let's add padding 0.4 rem all around. Okay, so now if we take a look, we're matched up to the original except for the coloring. So let's target the nav links themselves so we can change the colors of all the links to start with. Then we'll cover the hover and active class. So we'll reference the nav link, and then we're going to change the main color with color black. Then we'll need to override the original color with the navbar-light class by using !important. Okay, so now we should be matching up all of the link colors except for the home link, because that uses the active class, which we're going to give the blue shade that we're seeing here, as well as the hover pseudo class for the other links when we hover over them. So if you remember from the HTML a couple of minutes ago, we added the active class here to the home link. So let's reference that after the nav link class. So we can just copy this and paste it underneath, then add the active class. And to target both this and the hover state, we'll add a comma followed by the nav link class and then the hover pseudo class. Then the blue hex value that we'll use here is 396AFC. So now with our blue hover shade and the active blue shade, we're matching the original except for the box shadow that appears underneath it, which is going to be similar to the Jumbotrons further down the page, which I think looks really good with the sticky feature. So let's copy that box shadow CSS from the Jumbotron, and then let's go up and paste it in underneath the nav bar. Now if we save it, we'll have the box shadow, but I'm going to make it a little bit darker with 0.5. Now let's start laying out the first part of our HTML and CSS for our carousel image slider. First, we'll lay out our images and the buttons underneath that will indicate which slide we're on. Then we'll add the content on top of the image slider. So let's go back over to index.html and locate the image carousel comment that we see here. And if you'd like to learn more about the carousel with Bootstrap, you can take a look at the documentation in the components and see the different features that are available for the carousel. Okay, so underneath the image carousel comment, let's add our ID for the carousel, which is simply going to be carousel. And then this element will also have two classes. First, the carousel class, and then the slide class from Bootstrap. And these classes will interact with the Bootstrap JavaScript library for the image carousel. And I'm also going to drop the closing div to above the end image carousel comment. Then after our classes here, let's add data-ride carousel, and then we'll need to set a data interval. So this is going to be the time spent on each slide before it transitions to the next. And for now, let's add 5,000, which means 5 seconds. So now with that set, we're ready to start adding our carousel content to add our image slides. So before we can add the images, we'll need to add a class called carousel-inner. And then inside of our carousel inner, each one of the images will have a class called carousel-item around it. And the first one we're going to make active. Then we'll also add the image inside of it. And I'm going to drop this down to a different line here. Then we're ready to add our image source. So I'm going to hit Command B and open up the sidebar. And inside of the image folder, we'll have carousel and then 1, 2, and 3. So this is going to be img/carousel1.jpg. So now if we save it and take a look, we're going to see that the image is spanning outside of the window And if we were to flex up the page, it's not going to take up the full width past the image width. So we're going to add a class from Bootstrap called W-100, which means width 100. So now the image will take up 100% of the screen, no matter how wide or narrow it is. So now that this is set, we can see the box shadow for the navigation better, and it's a little darker than I think we'll want it. So let's reduce this to 0.2 from 0.5, making it 20% of the black shade instead of 50%. Now that our first image is set, let's add the rest of our images, and then we'll get to the indicators at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to copy this first carousel item with the image inside of it and paste it underneath twice. Then all we'll need to do is get rid of the active class for the second and third and change it to 2.jpg and 3.jpg. So now that we have all of our slides set, we can mess around with the data interval and the duration for how long each image will show. So if we change this to 1 second, it's going to go by pretty quickly, but I found that 6500 or 6.5 seconds seems to look pretty good with having a duration where people can read stuff on top of the image slider. But for now, I'm going to change this to add a couple of zeros to the end so it doesn't slide while we're building the website. So now let's drop down and add the carousel indicators that appear at the bottom of the screen, and these will be inside of an ordered list. So let's locate that comment for carousel indicators and start off with OL for the ordered list, followed by the class carousel-indicators, and then we'll hit enter, and inside of this we'll have a list item for each indicator, and we're going to give this list item a data target for the carousel element, which if you remember, we added the ID that simply says carousel. So we'll add the hashtag and carousel. Then each one will have an attribute called data slide to, and the first one will be 0. And then what we can do is just copy this first list item and paste it in twice. Then the second one will be 1 with data slide to, followed by 2 for the third. Then the first list item, we're going to give a class called active so it appears white in color. That way when we use the carousel indicator buttons to go to and from the different slides, we'll be able to tell which one we're on based on the color of it. Okay, so now with our indicator set, let's add a little bit of CSS. So you might notice that with the finished version, the height of the image carousel is cut off at a certain point, so it doesn't keep expanding in height on large screens. So in order to set the height, let's go back over to index.html, and we're going to locate the class called carousel-inner, and this is what we're going to add our max height to. Moving over to style.css, we have our carousel CSS comment. So I'll add carousel inner, then max height 40 rem, and we'll need to add important to override the height setting of the carousel image slider already. And now with 40 rem of height, this is going to be 720 pixels with 40 times 18 pixels. Next, let's change the transition speed between slides because it's kind of quick right now, as you can see, as compared to the original, which has a bit more of a smooth transition to and from the slides. So in order to target these, we'll need to reference classes that we haven't added in our HTML, but that will start with the carousel item class in addition to targeting carousel item active. So we'll want to target carousel item next and carousel item previous, then the active carousel item. So we'll say carousel item dash next, comma, carousel item dash prev or previous, comma, then the carousel item active class, and we're going to add the style declaration transition transform, then 2 seconds ease, and we'll just see how this looks at 2 seconds, which is going to be kind of slow, as you can see right here, but I'll let you be the judge depending on the audience of your website. So I'm going to change it to 1.2 seconds ease, which is the speed of the original and what I seem to like. So with that set, next let's change the size of our carousel indicators because they're kind of tough to see with the original size from Bootstrap. So to do this, we'll want to reference the carousel indicator ordered list as well as the list item. So we can just write carousel indicators and then li. So we'll add that class followed by list item. Now let's increase the width of this to a size that's going to be significantly larger than the original at 80 pixels, so we can see that we can size it however we want. And then for the height, we'll make that 20 pixels for right now. And now if we take a look, they're going to be larger than the original and the completed version. So let's reduce this to 40 pixels and the height to 6 pixels. Then what we'll do is the space in between them will be a little bit different. So let's increase the margin all around of 4 pixels. And now if we take a look, they're going to be separated, but they're going to be a little bit up the page. So what we can do is we can just target the margin right as well as margin left. This way we'll have the space in between them and their vertical alignment match the original version. Now let's move on to part 2 of the HTML and CSS for our carousel image slider. So let's start adding the content that sits on top of the first slide that we see here with the dark background. So over in index.html, let's locate the first image inside of the slider. And underneath the actual image tag, we're going to add a class from Bootstrap called carousel-caption. And this class is used to add content on top of the carousel. So inside of that, we're also going to add a class called container, similar to what we did with the navigation, to add a max width inside of the carousel caption class. And also inside of the container, we'll have a row, which will contain our column on top of the image slider, similar to one of the columns from the various sections of the website, like the 3-column section. So now that we have our row started to contain our columns, the first thing that we're going to add for the first column is we're going to add a class from Bootstrap to make it so the column actually doesn't appear yet. So if we just do a search for dNone or display none, we're going to see a few different classes where we can alter the display property of our column at different screen widths. So we're going to start this column here off with display none at the smallest of screen widths. And then once we get up to the medium screen width or the 720 pixel range, we're going to have it display block. So we'll say d-none and then d-md or 720 block. Next, let's add the number of columns that we want to set for the medium screen width once we start to see the column content display. And as you'll see on the third slide, we have an example of the Bootstrap grid system with the 12-column layout where you see the single column up to the 12-column taking up the entire width of the page. So let's start our first class off to add our medium screen width column back in index.html, which is going to take up basically the entire width. So we'll add col11md, and then once we've added that, we'll add the large screen width breakpoint. And for reference, the medium screen breakpoint right here will be 768 pixels, and then we have md, which was referenced with colmd12 or colmd11. So next, let's add the breakpoint for the large screen width at 992 pixels, where we're going to use up 9 out of the 12 available columns by writing the class col-lg-9. Then the next breakpoint is going to be at the extra large screen width of 1200 pixels, where we'll use up 8 out of the 12 available columns. So let's write col-xl-8. Then we're going to add the background color to this using a class from Bootstrap for the background color that will change later in the CSS, and that's going to be called bg-dark. Then in addition to this class, we're going to add a class to make it so we can have our content aligned to the right. So Bootstrap has a class called textRight, which means text align right. Then we can hit enter, and now we're ready to start adding our content inside of the column. So now in order to see the background color display, we can just add any text inside of the column. And now we're going to see the positioning of our column. So in order to get it positioned off to the right, we're going to add a class with Bootstrap to justify it. And that class is going to be justify content end, which is going to push the column off to the far right of the row. So before we add our content, let's center the column vertically on top of the image. And we're going to target the carousel-caption class to do that. So I'll copy the class and let's locate the CSS comment for the carousel content. Then we can add the carousel caption class, and we're going to give it some absolute positioning so we can position it wherever we want on top of the carousel inner. And then we're going to make it 47% from the top of the carousel inner to center it vertically. And then one other thing that we're going to do is, so the middle of our column is centered vertically. Once we add our content, we're going to add something called transform translate y -50%, which is going to move the column itself up 50% of its own height. Now we're ready to start adding the content inside of the column, replacing the simple paragraph text that we added. So first we'll add the heading from the original version where it says responsive website design. So let's move back over to index.html, and we're going to use a heading 3 tag to add the responsive website design text. And then we're also going to add some padding to the bottom of it. So if we take a look at the column here, you'll see that there's a little bit of space before we get to the border underneath it. And we'll use classes from the Bootstrap framework to add our padding. So if we just do a search for padding or margin in the utilities, here we'll see that we can use M or P, followed by top, bottom, left, right, X or Y axis, and then 1 through 5, which will give us 0.25 rem up to 3 rem of padding or margin around our element. So in our case, we're going to use padding bottom, which is PB for this element or for the heading 3, and we're going to give it 1 rem to the bottom. So that's going to be PB-3. And then once we hit enter, we can add the responsive website design text. So next, let's add the white border that appears underneath the original version. And then we're also going to add some space to the bottom of this border before we get to the paragraph text. So to add the border, we're going to use a class from Bootstrap called border-top. Then to add the white border, we'll add border-white. And now if we hit enter, we'll see that it's at the bottom of the column. So we're going to give it margin bottom of 1 rem with MB-3. Then to change the size of it so it's only taking up a partial width of the column, we're going to make it 75% of the width with W-75. And to position it off to the right, we'll use ML-auto, similar to what we did with the navigation menu. Now it's starting to take its shape, so let's add the paragraph text that appears underneath it next. So I'm just going to copy this. You can use lorem text by just typing in lorem for dummy text in Visual Studio Code. And we're going to use the lead class from Bootstrap with paragraph class lead. And the lead class is going to use the 300 font weight from the Google font that was already added for us. So as I said, you can just type in lorem for the dummy text, but I'm going to paste in the same paragraph content from the finished version. And with that, we're ready to add the button that appears underneath the paragraph content where it says learn more. So let's take a look at the Bootstrap buttons from the framework by just doing a search for buttons. And then we're going to see that we'll have the option to add solid buttons that we see here, or we can drop down and add the outline buttons. Then on this page, you'll also be able to check out the different sizes of the buttons and some other features. But for now, we're going to use the blue primary button using the btn-primary class. So let's start off with the A tag followed by the btn class. Then we'll add the blue btn-primary class. Then for now, let's add the btn-sm class for button small. And then once we hit enter, you can just add a hashtag here to keep it blank or link to a different page of your website. And I'll add the learn more ... text. So now once we save it and we go over to Visual Studio Code, we'll see that we have the small button displaying. So we can change that to large to have a big button, but to match the original, I'll leave it as btn-md for the medium size. Okay, so with that, we'll have all of the HTML for the first slide completed. So let's move on to the third slide where we're going to have the light colored column sitting on top of it off to the left. So this column is going to be similar to what we did previously, except for it's going to take on different width, and obviously we're going to use light background colors. So let's drop down to the third slide, and underneath the image, let's add the carousel-caption class. Then inside of that, we'll have the container, followed by the row inside of the container. Then once we hit enter and populate these HTML tags, let's add the same display none tag that we added to the first column with d-none and then dmd block so it starts to display at the medium screen width. Then for the number of columns, once we get up to the medium screen width at 768 pixels, we're going to use 9 out of the 12 available columns with col-md-9. Then at the next breakpoint of 992 pixels, or the large screen mark, we're going to drop that down to 7 out of the 12 available columns with col-lg7. So we'll use the 7 out of 12 available columns up to the large screen width, and next we're ready to add the background color. So with Bootstrap, we're going to use the bg-light background color, and then we'll also specify the positioning of our text with text-left. So now we're ready to add the content inside of the column, starting with a heading 3 where it says mobile friendly, and I'll just type that out here instead of copying it and pasting it. And then we'll be adding our margin to the border underneath it, but we're not going to add any padding to the mobile friendly text. So if we take a look at the text, it's going to be white in color, and we'll need to add a class to make it dark. So let's use Bootstrap's class called text-dark to do that. So now once we save it, we'll have our dark heading 3 text, and later on we'll style it to match the original, but for now let's add the border that appears underneath it. This border will use classes similar to the first, so we can just copy this HTML and then paste it into the third slide here. Then let's do away with the white and make that dark. And let's also remove ML-auto because it's going to be positioned off to the left. Then for the spacing around the actual border, if we take a look at it, we're going to have margin on the top and bottom. So we'll use MY for the vertical axis -1 for 0.25 rem top bottom. And now we're ready to add the text underneath it. So I'm going to copy the paragraph text, and let's drop down to add the paragraph tag with the lead class. Then underneath the paragraph text, let's add the button, which is going to use the A tag again with the btn class, and btn-light for the white button, in addition to the btn-md class for button medium. Then I'll add a hashtag again to leave the button blank and add the learn more ... text. So with that, when we save it, we'll have all of our HTML content laid out for the carousel image slider, and we're ready to add our CSS. Now let's add the last part of our HTML and CSS to the image carousel, which will include our CSS styling. So in just a few minutes, we'll get to the light version that we see right here of the column, but first, let's get to the dark column styling for the first slide. So in our HTML, we have the class called bg-dark, and we're going to reference that in style.css to change Bootstrap styling of the bg-dark class. So let's paste that in, and we're going to give this a background color with a transparent black shade using red, green, blue alpha. Then we'll use all black similar to the box shadow that we added earlier in the video, and use !important to override the background color of the bg-dark class. So now we're barely going to be able to see the background color, so let's change it to 0.7 to give it a 30% transparency. And next, let's alter the border radius by adding border radius 1.5 rem all around. And this will give it nice, soft, rounded corners, which is going to be more rounded than the classes that Bootstrap has to offer with the border radius. Then lastly, let's add some padding all around to match the finished version. We could use p-3 in our HTML, but we'll just do it here with padding 1 rem all around. Okay, so now with this set, we'll get to the heading 3 text in just a bit, but first we can apply similar CSS to the bg-white class. So let's grab that from our HTML right here. Then in style.css, I'll actually copy the style declaration and paste it in. Then let's change our red, green, blue colors to all white using 255 instead of black. Then when we save it, we'll need to change the class to bg-light. And now when we take a look at the third slide, there we have the light transparent background color, but you'll also notice that this is going to affect the bg-light class in the navigation. So you can kind of see the border radius appearing with the navigation now. So what we'll do is let's change this to bg-white instead. And this will be our own custom background class that's a non-Bootstrap class, but we'll have the same effect with the styling while keeping the navigation bg-light class. Now let's change the sizing of the heading 3 where we see the mobile-friendly text. Then we'll get to the paragraph text and increase that a little bit underneath it. So this will affect the heading on the first and the third slides. And we're going to target the heading 3 inside of the Carousel caption class. So a heading 3 can be used aside from this with its own styling. So in style.css, I'll paste in the Carousel caption class, followed by heading 3. Then let's increase the font size of it to 2.3 rem. And let's also decrease the font weight to match the original because we don't want the bold font weight. That's not going to match the paragraph text. We'll give it the same 300 font weight as the lead class paragraph text. So lastly, the lead class with Bootstrap already gives us larger paragraph text than normal, but we're going to increase it a little bit more to match the original as you saw there when I toggle back and forth. So I'm going to drop down and add p.lead. Then let's increase the font size to 1.4 rem. So now when we toggle back and forth, we should be pretty close to the original, but the background color is slightly off. So we'll make this 0.65 instead of 0.7. And now the carousel slider is matching up with the original website design. Now let's lay out the HTML and CSS for our social media menu bar icons. Okay, so let's drop down underneath the image slider and focus on the social media bar where we see the text on the left and the icons on the right. So back over in index.html, let's drop down to where we see the Start Social Jumbotron HTML comment. And if you're not familiar with the Bootstrap Jumbotron class, this is a feature in Bootstrap that gives us a background color and spacing already to an element. So as you can see here, it's going to give us the gray shade using the Jumbotron class with some padding around it. So we're going to use that to lay out the social bar. Then similar to the navigation, in addition to the Jumbotron class, we'll add the sticky-top class. Then similar to the navigation and the carousel slider, we already have a div ID set surrounding this, so it's going to know what space it should be sticky in. Then inside of it, we'll have a container followed by a row inside of that. So the container, as we know, is going to set a max width for it, similar to the navigation and the carousel image slider. Then the column for the social media icons, we're going to center that once it takes up only some of the screen width using a class from Bootstrap called justify-content-center, similar to the end class that we used for the first column in the carousel. And we'll also add text-center to center the text as well as the social media icons once they're inside of their list items, which we'll add in just a moment. Let's start off with the first column containing our heading text, and we're going to use a display none class for this and have it display at the extra large screen width. So let's add d-none, then d-xl-block, and we'll take up half of the screen at the extra large screen width using the class col-xl-6. Then to match up the height of the social media icons, we're going to add a little bit of padding on the top of 0.25 rem with pt-1. Then we can add our heading 3 text. So I'm going to copy the connect with us on social media text and paste that in. You can write it out or add the lorem dummy text here. And now we're ready to drop down to the second column containing the social media icons. So this column, we're going to have a couple of different breakpoints working up to the extra large half screen width. So we're going to start at the small screen width, which is the 576 pixel breakpoint right here, using up 10 out of the available columns with the class col-sm-10. Then for the next breakpoint at the medium screen 768 pixel breakpoint, we're going to keep the section around the same width by reducing the number of columns to 8 from 10 with col-md-8. Then for the large screen width, we'll reduce it by 1, as well as the extra large screen going to half of the 12 available columns. Then similar to the first column, let's add the same padding top 0.25 rem with PT-1. So now we're ready to add the actual social media icons, and we're going to put these inside of an unordered list. So each icon itself will be inside of a list item. So let's add our unordered list, which we'll give a class called social. Then inside of our unordered list, we'll have our list item with a link inside of it. Then once you add your link, to open it up in a new tab, we'll add the attribute target underscore blank. And in between the A tags, we can add our font awesome icon, which we covered early on in the tutorial. So let's go over there, and I'm going to type in Facebook for the first icon. Then we'll see the different Facebook icons that we can select from. And this one's just going to be FA-Facebook, starting with FAB for font awesome brand. So let's paste that in between the A tags. And now if we save it and take a look in the version we're working on, there we have our first font awesome icon displaying. So since all of the font awesome icons will have different colors, what we're going to do is we'll add inline CSS for their colors that we see here, and the hover color we'll do in style.css. So I'm going to write inside of the I tag, style color, and then hashtag, and I'll leave it blank for right now so we can use this for all of the icons. Then for Facebook, their hex value is 3B5998. So once we save it, we'll have the Facebook icon displaying with their blue shade. Now let's go about adding the rest of the social media icons with their relative hex values. So we can fly through these. Let's copy the Facebook icon and paste that in 5 times for all of the rest of the icons. Then all we'll have to change is the social media icon and the color. So the second icon is Twitter, followed by Instagram. Then we have YouTube, Pinterest, and LinkedIn. Okay, so let's save it and take a look. So there we have all of our icons, except for the Instagram one. It's actually going to be Instagram-square. And now we're ready to add the colors to them. So let's start off with Twitter, which is the hex value 00ACED. Then for Instagram, it's 3F729B. Then for the YouTube red hex value, it's C4302B. For Pinterest, the hex value is C8232C. Then lastly, for LinkedIn, it's 0E76A8. Now with all of our HTML complete, we're ready for our CSS styling, starting with the unordered list social class, since we already have the Jumbotron set for us in style.css. So let's add our ul.social class, and then let's get rid of the bullet points next to our list items by saying list style type none. Then we're going to add display flex, which will get the list items displaying next to one another. Then they'll take up the width of the column once we center the list items themselves. To do that, let's reference the ul.social class again, and we're also going to add the list item to the end of it. So ul.social li, and we'll center the list items by adding margin 0 auto. So now if we save it, we'll see that they're taking up the column width, and next let's give them their full width size. So we're going to target the Jumbotron class in case you want to resize icons in other parts of the website, and I'm going to inspect the social icon so we can get the class directly from Font Awesome, which is called svg-inline-fa. So I'll paste that in here. Then let's change the font size to 2 rem. And we'll also add some margin. So we're going to add margin 0 top bottom and 1 rem left right to space them apart by 18 pixels. Later in the tutorial, we're going to resize the icons for the smaller screens, but the size that we just added is going to be for the extra large screen width. So let's compare it to the original. And when we do, we'll see that they're not taking up as much width as the finished version, and there's too much height to them. So let's remove the padding from the social class of the unordered list, and that's going to adjust the width to match the finished version. But then we're also going to have too much height. So let's remove the margin top bottom also and center it by adding margin 0 auto to the unordered list. Then lastly, with our icons, let's change the color when we hover over them by using the hover pseudo class. So what we can do is copy the same CSS and then just add the :hover or the hover pseudo class to the end of it. Then we'll change the color to gray. And if we check it now, this isn't going to change just yet because we have the inline CSS for the color. So we'll need to add !important in order to see the hover shade. Now let's start laying out the heading and 3-column section HTML and CSS. So let's scroll down the page to where we see the complete website heading along with the underline, the heading underneath that, followed by the 3-column section where we'll be adding our font awesome icons. Let's start off with the heading where it says complete website, and over in index.html, locate the HTML comment where it says main page heading. Then instead of adding a container and a row, since this content is going to be centered, we'll just skip right to adding a full width column using the col-12 class. Then all of our text is going to be centered in this column, so we'll use the text-center class. And in addition to this, we're going to add some space up top to separate it from the social bar with MT-5 for margin top 3 rem. So now for the complete website text that we see here, we're going to put this inside of a heading 1 tag, and we're going to use a class similar to what we did with the lead class with Bootstrap called display-4. Then let's also add some additional space above this text with PT-4, which means padding top 1.5 rem. So now once we save it, if we take a look in Chrome, there we have our display-4 text, and with display we can go from display-1 being the largest text, which you'll see here, and then down to, I think display-4 is actually the smallest because display-5 is just going to give us the bold original heading 1 text. I don't think that's a class actually with Bootstrap. So we'll use display-4, and then now that that's set, let's drop down and add the border that displays underneath it. So let's use the border top class similar to what we did with the image slider. Then we'll use the border dark class to give it the black shade, and we're going to give this a width of 50% of the page or 50% of the column. Then let's center it using the MX auto class and add some margin to the top and bottom of it of 1 rem with MY-3. Okay, so now with that set, we're going to have our border appearing underneath the display-4 text, and now we're ready to add the paragraph text that appears underneath it. So similar to what we used in the image slider, let's use the paragraph lead class here, and then I'll add the built with HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap text. Okay, so that looks good, but so we're not looking at the very bottom of the page, I'm going to add some space to the bottom of our HTML document just above the JavaScript source files. So I'll just call this div space, and then let's give it some internal style for its height with a height of 80 vertical height. That way we can scroll down the page a little bit to see our content displaying in the middle of the video. Okay, so now with this set, let's drop down to the 3-column section that appears underneath it with the icons, paragraph text, and buttons. So let's locate the HTML comment for the 3-column section underneath the main page heading, and we're going to start this off with a div class container to set a max width, and then inside of that we're going to add a row, and similar to what we did with the social menu bar, we're going to have our columns centered at the large screen width as we see right here. So we're going to use that same justify-content center class. Then in order to separate the 3-column section from the col-12 above as well as the border underneath, let's add margin top bottom 3 rem with MY5 and use the text center class because all of our content will be centered inside of the columns. So now let's start our first column off, and I'm going to reduce the screen width because we're going to go from the narrowest of screens up to the widest screen as we're specifying the column classes. So we're going to keep the single column width up to the medium screen mark where we change it into the 2-column layout. So let's use the class col-md-6 for the 2-column layout. Then once we get up to the large screen, it's going to shift into the 3-column layout. So 3 goes into 12 4 times, as we know. Then with the 3-column layout, we already have margin on the top and bottom, but when we get down to the smaller screen widths, we're going to want to add some additional spacing around it. So let's give it padding top bottom of 1 rem with py-3. Now we're ready to add our Font Awesome icons. So let's go back over to the Font Awesome website, and we're going to take a look at the documentation using the docs link in the navigation, and go down to the stacking icons link on the right sidebar. Then we're going to use the icon that has the square and the 4x size that we see right here. So I'm going to copy that HTML with the span class to stack the icons in addition to the square. And for now, we'll have the terminal icon on top of the square, but we're going to change that to the HTML icon. So that's going to be FA-HTML5. So now if we take a look in Chrome, whoops, that's actually going to be the brand FAB class to start off the icon. And there we have our HTML5 icon inside of the square. So for now, let's go about changing the color of the HTML5 icon internally here with style, and then the hex value DD4D26. Then later we'll take care of the gray shade in style.css, similar to what we did with the social bar. So now with this set, let's add the paragraph text now that appears underneath it where it says HTML5, the best for learning to code websites. So we'll use the lead class again, and then I'll paste in the paragraph text. Then underneath that, we'll have our button, which will use the same classes up until the btn-outline-light class. And we'll use btn-md. Then I'll add the learn more ... text. Okay, so now if we take a look at it in Chrome, we'll actually need to use the dark btn-outline dark class for the button. And there we have it matching the original aside from the gray square icon. So let's fill out the rest of the icons and then we'll change the gray background. So let's copy this column and paste it in twice. Then all we'll need to change is the HTML5 reference to Bootstrap and CSS3. So I'm going to change this to Bootstrap as well as the HTML5 lead text. Then we'll do the same with the CSS icon class as well as the paragraph text. So now if we take a look in Chrome, we should have all 3 icons displaying, but actually the CSS3 one is different. So we'll want to use the alternative CSS3 icon with CSS3-alt. Then let's change the hex value to 026db6, which will give us the blue shade with CSS3. And for the Bootstrap purple shade, that's going to be 563d7c. Okay, so now if we save it, we'll be all set except for the black background color. So we'll want to change that to the gray shade. And to do that, what we're going to do is target the FA-square class that we see here in the icon stack. So instead of changing the color itself, what we can do is simply change the opacity. So first let's add the FA-square class, then let's give it an opacity of 0.05, which is going to be the light gray shade that we've been seeing in the 3-column layout. Now let's lay out the content for our 2-column section with HTML and CSS. Okay, so let's take a look underneath the 3-column section that we just added, and before we lay out the 2-column section, we'll want to add the border that appears above it that spans the entire width of the page. So let's locate the border HTML comment, and then what we can do is we can go up and grab the border HTML that we added underneath the heading and paste that in underneath it. And add a little bit of space next to the border HTML comment, then paste it in. And the only thing that we'll need to change here is going to be the width. So it spans 100% of the page. So let's change W50 to W100. Okay, so now if we take a look, our border is going to span the entire width of the page. And before we move on to our 2-column section, we're going to have another border further down the page. So I'm going to copy this HTML and look for the second border HTML comment, and I'll just paste that underneath so we don't have to add it later. And that's the only one in addition to the one that we just added above the 2-column layout. Okay, so with the 2-column section, similar to what we did with the 3-column and the content on our image slider, what we're going to do is add a container first, and we're going to add some space above it. So let's add container. Then above this, we're going to add margin top 5 or margin top 3 rem. Then inside of that, we'll have our row. Then for our first column, unlike the 3-column section, we're just going to have one breakpoint here, which is going to be at the large screen width instead of the medium screen width. So this will be at 992 pixels. So let's use the class col-lg-5 for 5 out of the 12 available columns. Then we're also going to add margin to the bottom for screen widths underneath 992 pixels. But once we get up to 992 pixels, we're going to remove the margin bottom and make it centered vertically alongside the image on the right. So at the wider width, you'll see it centered vertically here. And to do that, we're going to change the margin at the large screen width to MYLG auto. Okay, and then once we hit enter, we're ready to start adding our content, starting with the heading 1. So the heading 1 that we see right here, we're going to use a bold font weight for that from Bootstrap called font weight bold. Then let's also add some margin to the bottom of it with MB-3 for margin bottom 1 rem. Then I'll paste in the 12 website bundle text. Okay, so now with our heading set, we're ready to add the content that appears underneath it, which is the paragraph text. And for this, we'll just use regular paragraph text, but we're going to add some space underneath it. So let's add P and then the class margin bottom 4 for 1.5 rem, and I'll paste in the text. Then underneath the paragraph, let's add the button. And this is going to be the same BTN outline dark class that we used before, but we're going to use BTN LG for the large size button. And I'll add my website address in this one in addition to target_blank. Then the text see the bundle. Okay, so now once we save it, we'll have the first column set positioned off to the left, and we're ready to add the second column with the image that sits in it with the tablet. So let's go back over and we're going to use up the remaining columns. So we'll have 7 remaining out of the 12 after 5 with col-lg-7. Then inside of that, we'll have our image and we'll give it the width 100 class, similar to the carousel. Then the image file name is img/tablet.png. Okay, so let's save it and take a look. So there we have our 2-column layout, but there's not enough space underneath it, in my opinion. So let's add a little bit more padding around the row of 1.5 rem top bottom. So we'll use py-4. And now that's going to have sufficient spacing around the image and the text section. So since we already have the HTML and CSS for the fixed background image, so let's enable that by adding the right angle bracket to remove the HTML comment or to remove it from being commented out, in addition to the Jumbotron that appears underneath the fixed background image section. Okay, so let's save it and see what we end up with. So it looks good except for we have the fixed top Jumbotron instead of the sticky top. So let's go back over to index.html and change that from fixed top to sticky top. And then once we save it, that's going to be underneath the fixed background image section. So we're completed down to that point. Now let's move on to the second 2 and 3 column sections that appear before the footer section of the website. So let's go back to index.html and locate the 3-column section HTML comment, which is underneath the Jumbotron section. So this 3-column section will have a similar feel to the previous 3-column section that we added with the Font Awesome icons. So we're going to have the 3 columns go from a single column width up to 2 columns, followed by the 3 columns at the 992 pixel mark. But first, let's start off with our container inside of the 3-column section HTML comment. And then inside of that, we'll have our row with the justify-content center class. Then we're also going to add some margin to the top and bottom with my-5 for 3 rem top bottom. And let's add the text center class because all of our content is going to be centered here. So now let's start our first column, which is going to take up half of the page at the medium screen mark with MD-6. Then 4 out of the 12 available columns on the 992 pixel mark. And we're also going to add some space to the top bottom. So let's add margin top bottom 1.5 rem. Now for the content inside of the column, let's start off with the agency website heading, which is one of the website designs in the bundle pack. And we're going to put that inside of a heading 4. Then let's add some margin to the top and bottom of 1 rem with my-3. Then for the image underneath that, we'll use the w-100 class. And the image source is img/agency.png. Now we can add the paragraph text underneath that. So I'll add the p tag and I'm going to copy the paragraph text here and paste that in. Then for the button underneath, what we can do is just take the button from the section above and change that to see the design ... And we'll need to change the button class from primary to outline-dark. So now scrolling down, we'll have the first column of the 3-column section laid out, as we see here with the agency website design. And what we can do, similar to the previous 3-column section, is just copy and paste the HTML, then change the heading text and the image. So I'll copy this and paste it underneath, then change the heading to the business website, as well as the image to business.png. Then we can paste it in once more to get the parallax website design that we see here. So we'll once again change the heading 4 to the parallax website and the image to parallax.png. Okay, so now if we save it and take a look, we'll have our second 3-column section all laid out as we can see here, followed by the border underneath. And now we're ready to lay out the second 2-column section that appears underneath that, which will be similar to the first, but it's going to take on different column widths. So what we can do is we can copy the previous 2-column section instead of writing out all of the HTML. So I'll go up and copy the HTML inside of the 2-column section comment. Then let's go down and paste it inside of the second 2-column section comment. And let's change the content around before we get to the changing of the actual column widths. So let's change the heading to the complete responsive websites, followed by the paragraph section. So I'll copy that and paste that in, taking over the previous paragraph content. And the button where it says see the bundle, we can keep the same, but the image will change to responsive.png from the tablet.png image. So now if we save it and take a look, we'll see that we have the content laid out, but you'll notice that the columns aren't the same width. So we're going to reduce the width of the first column and increase the width of the second column. So we'll make this 4 out of 12 instead of 5 out of 12 columns, and let's make sure that the margin is 3 rem top bottom instead of just the top. So I'll change this to LG4. Then we'll change the bottom one to LG8. Okay, so let's save it. And now when we scroll down, the website's really going to start taking its form as we get down to the last 2-column section. And if you remember, we already have the Jumbotron before the footer laid out for us from the starter files. So all we'll need to do is add another right angle bracket to the HTML comment to activate that section. So let's add that. And we'll also want to remove the fixed bottom class so it's not stuck to the bottom of the page. So now taking a look in Chrome, we're completed all the way down to the last Jumbotron section. Now let's lay out the HTML and CSS for the footer and socket sections of the website. First, we'll lay out the footer, which is the light gray 3-column section. Then we'll get to the socket at the very bottom of the website with the dark black background. So let's move over to index.html and locate the footer or start footer HTML comment. And we're going to use the footer tag here. So we'll give it the bg-dark background color for now, then later change it in the CSS. And we'll also add our container inside of the footer, then our row. And the row here, we're also going to give a class to center our content, which is going to be the justify-content center class. Then in addition to that, we're going to center our text using the text center class. And we're also going to make all of our text inside of the footer white in color using the text light class. Okay, so now that we have our footer, container, and row set, let's add our first column, which is going to include the logo and the paragraph section at the very top. And this section is going to take up 100% of the width until we get to the medium screen width, where we're going to make it take up 9 out of the available columns. So let's add the col-md9 class. Then inside of that, we'll add our image for the logo, which will be img/logo-white.png. And underneath that, we'll add our paragraph text. So I'll copy it and paste it in. So now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, we should have our bg-dark class, and we're going to have the rounded corners because of the class in the carousel, but we'll be changing that to our own custom background color, as well as resizing the logo in just a bit. But first, let's lay out our 3-column section underneath the col-md9 class, and these are all going to start with col-md4, so they're going to go from the single column width to the 3 columns at 768 pixels. And with the container class, they're going to jump in size a little bit, resizing at the 3-column layout. So first, let's add the border that surrounds the heading at the top of each section. So we're going to use an HR class for this instead of adding border top, and we'll give it the class bg-light for background color light to give us the white border. Then underneath that, we'll add the contact info text inside of a heading 5 tag. And underneath that, we'll add the same HR tag with the class bg-light to give us the second border underneath the heading 5. Now let's add the paragraph text that appears underneath it, starting with the phone number. So I'll add the phone number here, as well as the email address underneath it. And we're going to give the email address an email link, so when someone clicks on it, their email program will open by adding mail to : then the email address. And then I'll write the email address for the actual paragraph text. And underneath that, we'll add the street name. As well as the city, state, and postal code or zip code. Okay, so let's save it and take a look. So there we have our first column, and we'll change the email address color in a bit, but let's also add a link for the phone number. So I'm just going to delete this, and let's start a new paragraph tag with the link inside of it, then add the tel : phone number link. So when somebody clicks on it, it's going to prompt them to make a call. And then I'll add the phone number text here inside of the paragraph and the link. So as you'll see, it's going to prompt FaceTime here on my Mac. And later, as I said, we'll change the links to be white in color. For now, let's add the second column for the footer section. So we can just copy this and paste it underneath. Then I'll change the heading to say our hours. And underneath that, we'll do away with the phone number and email address. Then for the hours, we'll have Monday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for the first line, or the first paragraph tag. Then we have Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the last one is closed on Sunday, or Sunday closed. Okay, and then with that, the last column is just going to have the city, state, zip, or postal code. So I'll just change the text to say service area. Then we can delete everything except for the address, and we'll have that display 4 different times. Okay, so now let's take a look. And it looks good except for I forgot or deleted the line underneath the service area. So I'll just copy this and paste it underneath. And now we have all of our content for the footer section displaying. So let's drop down and add the socket that appears underneath the footer, where we have the socket HTML comment just under the end of the footer section. So we're going to wrap this with a div class that we'll give a custom name to called socket. Then we'll make our text light in color and center our text. Then let's also add some padding to the top and bottom of the text of 1.5 rem with py-4. Then we can hit enter, and inside of that we'll have our paragraph text. And let's add the copy symbol or copyright symbol with ampersand copy semicolon, then our link. And I'm going to put my website address in here with w3newbie.com and target underscore blank to open it up in a new tab. Then I'll write w3newbie.com for the text that appears inside of the link. So with this copyright symbol, I always appreciate backlinks to my website for my themes and courses or tutorials, but you're welcome to change it to your own website address or website name. So now we're ready to start styling the footer section, starting with the background color, and then we'll resize the logo. So we'll want to target the footer tag itself inside of style.css underneath the footer CSS comment. So let's reference the footer tag, and let's change the background color to the hex value 383838, which is sort of a off black dark gray shade. And to see it, we'll just need to remove the bg-dark class. Okay, so now we'll have our dark footer background color, and now let's add some padding around it. So we're going to add some custom padding inside of style.css instead of using the Bootstrap classes, and we're going to give it padding of 1 rem on the top, 2 rem left right, as we see here, which makes the container a little bit narrower. So let's add 2 rem or 36 pixels, and then on the bottom we're going to add a little bit more with 3 rem padding. Okay, so now with this set, let's resize our logo image next. So we'll target the image inside of the footer tag. Then let's reduce the height to 3.5 rem. And we're also going to add some margin to the top and bottom to separate it a little bit more from the top of the footer and the paragraph text underneath, with margin 1.5 rem top bottom and auto left right. Okay, so now our footer should start to take shape, except for we'll want to change the links to be white in color in addition to the link in the socket section, because that's going to have a dark background as well. So what we'll do is we're going to reference footer A for all of the links inside of the footer, and let's make the color white. Then let's remove the text decoration underneath it, or the underline, by saying text decoration none. Then in addition to this, once we hover over our links, we're going to see that they're still blue in color. But before we target the hover pseudo class, let's add the socket link here as well. And then we can copy this and paste it in, then add the hover pseudo class to both the footer link and the socket link. So now we'll have our links white in color when we go back to Chrome, and we're not going to be able to see the one in the socket, so let's add the background color to the socket class now. So what we'll do is reference that socket class here and add the background color with the hex value all 2s, which is a darker gray or off black shade than the 3.8 hex values. And let's add a simple border to the top of it. So with the CSS, we'll add border top 0.1 rem solid gray. Okay, so once we save it, we'll have all of our HTML completed for the full width version of the website. Let's just get rid of the white space that appears underneath it by removing the inline height that we added at the bottom of index.html. Okay, so with that, we have, as I said, all of the full width version of the website completed. So now we're ready to add our responsive media query CSS to make it so it looks better on tablet and mobile devices. But first, don't forget to remove the additional zeros for the data interval if you did that earlier on in the tutorial, so we can have the image slider data interval set at 6.5 seconds. Now let's add our responsive CSS media queries for the mobile and tablet versions of the website. So I'm going to open up the website using a responsive website design tester extension here in Chrome. And once we do that, we'll see that there's a few elements of the website that we'll want to resize for the mobile width, including the social icons, the carousel indicators for the slider, and aspects of the navigation menu. We'll also resize some of the text, including the text on top of the carousel with the headings, as well as the lead class content that we've used with the paragraph sections on top of the image slider, as well as in other places on the website. So we're going to start with our changes that affect the widest of the media queries, working down to the narrowest of screens. And the first thing that we're going to change will be the heading 3 that sits on top of the image carousel. So as you'll see with the responsive website design text, underneath 1200 pixels in width, that's going to decrease in size. And then when we flex the window down a little bit more, the paragraph text is going to decrease at the 992 pixel mark. And the paragraph text will stay that size until the carousel caption content disappears. So let's target the heading 3 text using the h3 tag inside of the carousel caption class. And we'll need to locate the first media query in style.css where it says the devices underneath 1200 pixels or 1199. So I'll add the carousel caption class and then the heading 3. And we're going to reduce the font size to 1.8 rem, which will be reduced from 2.3 rem originally. So I'll copy this and paste it below in reference to the heading 3, and we'll only need to add the CSS that we want to change at this device width. So now once we flex the window down, we'll see that the heading 3 text will change at that 1200 pixel mark. So next, let's move on to the paragraph text that appears underneath that, and we'll resize the text for the lead class at the 992 pixel mark, which will also affect the lead paragraph text that appears further down the page. So for example, the 3-column section, as well as the text underneath the border where it says complete website. So let's copy the paragraph lead font size style declaration that we have right here, and then paste it underneath the 992 pixel media query. Then we'll just reduce the font size to 1.2 rem from 1.4. Okay, so now when we flex the website down, we'll see that the paragraph text will resize at 992 pixels. So next, let's tackle the carousel indicators that we see here and reduce the size to match the original, which is going to drop down at the 992 pixel mark as well. So over in style.css, let's go up the page and copy the carousel indicators li CSS. Then we can paste that in underneath the 992 media query, and I'll change the width to 30 pixels, the height to 4 pixels, and margin right and margin left will reduce to 3 pixels. Okay, so now once we save it, we'll have our reduced carousel indicator list items underneath the 992 pixel mark. So next, let's move down the page, and underneath the 768 pixel mark, we're going to reduce the size of the paragraph lead text once more to a slightly smaller font size. So let's go and copy the paragraph lead text from the 992 pixel breakpoint and paste that in here to 768, and we'll reduce the font size to 1.1 rem, which is the original font size with the lead class. So now with that change, let's focus on the navigation because we're going to resize a couple of aspects, starting with the logo, which you'll see is a slightly reduced size underneath 768 pixels. So in style.css, let's add the navbar brand image, or you can go up and copy it from towards the top of style.css, and we're going to reduce the height from 2.8 rem down to 2.5 rem. Okay, so with that, the next thing that we'll do is we're also going to reduce the size of our links inside of the navigation to make them a slightly smaller font size, and we'll reduce the spacing around the navbar itself. So let's reference the navbar class. Then we'll add font size 1 rem down from 1.1 rem, I believe. Then we'll also change the padding around for the navbar itself to reduce it a little bit so there's not as much space around the logo. So we'll say padding 0.3 rem top bottom and 0.6 rem left right. And that looks pretty good except for it's a little bit off with the navigation. So let's change it to 0.4 rem. And that's going to match the original. Also, one thing that I forgot to include in the video is to change the size of the navbar toggler icon. So you can use this CSS right here if you want to reduce the size of the navbar toggler icon at the 768 pixel mark. So while we're resizing the navigation, let's change it for the devices underneath 576 pixels as well. So what we can do is simply copy the CSS for the two style declarations for the logo as well as the navbar itself, and I'll paste that in. Then let's reduce the height of the logo image to 2.3 rem, the padding top bottom to 0.3 rem, and the font size to 0.9 rem from 1 rem. Okay, so now if we toggle back and forth between our version and the original, we'll have the navigation matching up, but you'll notice that the social icons aren't matching up. So let's reduce the size for those at the 992 pixel mark. And I'm going to copy the CSS that we added for the full width devices and paste that into the 768 pixel mark because they're going to be the same size at 992, just the column is going to reduce in width. So I'll paste that into the 768 width, and let's reduce the font size to 1.6 rem and the margin left right to 0.8 rem. Then for the 576 pixel width, we'll reduce the font size to 1.4 rem and the margin left right to 0.5 rem. Okay, so now let's take a look, and once we flex it down underneath the 768 pixel mark, we'll have the resized font awesome social media icons in the bar underneath the slider. And with that, that does it for the complete responsive website design tutorial. I want to thank you for watching. Please remember to comment, like this video, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. And stick around for a couple of minutes because I'm going to show you how to upload our completed website to the internet now on your own domain name. Now let's upload our completed website design to the internet on our own domain name. So I'm going to start from my website at w3newbie.com and go to the resources page where I'll have a link to Bluehost, which is the web host we're going to use to upload our website to the internet. Or you can just go to w3newbie.com/hosting, which I'll have a link to in the description. And this link will serve as a discount link to a page that Bluehost has created for me because I've been recommending their hosting services for so long to followers of my website and on YouTube, so followers can get a discount to their hosting plans. So once we're on the plans page, if you're just building one website, I would go with the basic plan, but if you're building more than that, I would go with the plus. But for a single website, the basic plan will serve just fine. You're probably never going to need more than 50 gigabytes in space. You'll get a free SSL certificate, which will give you the lock symbol up here. And then you'll have the option to have subdomains as well as 5 different domain name email accounts, which if you look to the resources page of my website, you'll learn how to add to Gmail. So the email storage wouldn't matter anyways with your emails going to Gmail using your domainname.com email address. So once you select the plan that you want, we're going to be brought to a page where we can create a new domain name or use a domain name we own. So since we get a free domain name anyways, I always choose to create a new one with my Bluehost accounts. And I'm going to sign up with the domain name drew-host.com just for an example domain name. I don't really have one that I'm going to use at this time, but as we can see up top, the domain name is available. So I'm going to add my account information, and I'll skip through the video just for a moment and blur out my info. And then we can choose the package plan or package information. So with Bluehost, because I know that I'm going to need it anyways, I go with the longest term. But if you just want to go with the cheapest amount overall, you can choose the 12-month plan. Then beneath that, we'll have the option to select some package extras. And the only thing that I recommend, depending on your situation, is the domain name privacy and protection. So every domain name that's online has to have something called whois contact information attached to it. It's kind of like if you have a piece of real estate, you have to have an owner's name and information attached to it. So if you want to keep your contact information private, I would choose to have the domain name privacy. That way, Bluehost's contact information will be what's public. But if you're using a business address or a PO box or something, you might not need to worry about that. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to elect to add the domain name privacy and then add my payment information, which I'll just blur out, and then select I've read and agreed to the terms of service and cancellation policy, which is a 30-day refund policy, I believe. And then I'm going to hit submit. Then once we're signed up, we're going to see that we have a confirmation email sent to us, as well as the option to download the receipt at the bottom of the page. And I'm going to hit create account. Then we'll come to a page where we create our account password attached to our domain name. So I have a password prepared already, and I'll select I've read and agreed to the terms, and then hit create account once more. Then it says our account is ready and we can log in. Then on the login page, we'll just need to add our password once more. And I'm going to hit save with Google Chrome. Then Bluehost is going to run us through a couple of questions here, which we can skip through or you can add your answers to, but it's not going to matter later on. So I'm going to skip through all of this, including the theme options. And the reason that Bluehost is showing all of this is because Bluehost is really popular for WordPress websites. In fact, WordPress themselves recommends Bluehost, so by default, Bluehost adds WordPress to the server for us when we sign up with an account. So to prepare our account for an HTML website instead of WordPress, we'll just need to take 2 simple steps, which I'm going to show you how to do. But before we do that, remember that you're going to have an email from Bluehost, which you'll need to check to verify your domain. So be sure to check for that and click the verification button. So now back on the Bluehost website, we're going to go down to the advanced link here, and I'm going to show you the first step to get rid of WordPress. So this is an optional step, but I would recommend doing it just so you know everything is cleared that was installed on the server for WordPress originally. And we're going to go into MySQL databases. Then once we're in MySQL databases, scroll down and hit delete on the database that you see, and then delete database. And this will delete the WordPress database that was installed automatically. Then we can go back to the advanced screen, and we're going to go to something called File Manager, where we'll delete the WordPress files and add our website files. So once you're here, click on the public_HTML folder right here. And then that's going to bring us into the directory of all of the files on our domain name. So I'm going to hit select all so we can just delete all of the WordPress files that are here at once. And then go up to delete, then skip trash and permanently delete, then hit confirm. And now our directory is completely blank and ready for our website files. So go up and select the upload button. Then we'll be able to drag and drop our HTML files once we add them to a zip folder. So I'm going to use the agency theme from w3newbie.com, and I'm just going to select all the files, right click them, and then hit compress 10 items. So then we'll have our zip folder, and we can drag and drop this zip to Bluehost. So just give it a moment to upload, and then we'll go back to the file manager, and then we'll need to click the zip and then go up to extract and hit extract files and then hit close. And now all of our website files will be on our domain name. So in my case here, some files from my Mac somehow came along with the website file. So I'm just going to delete those and skip the trash. And we can also delete the zip archive that we created because we're not going to need that anymore. And now we're ready to check out our domain name with our website files on it. So I'm going to go up and add my drew-host.com URL. And then if we go to our website, it might be a little bit slow at first because the server space is still getting set up, but you should see your website files uploaded, and you can go over to different pages of the website. So for example, I'll just go to the Contact Us page with the contact form and the Google map. And then the last thing that I'm going to show you how to do is add an SSL certificate, which is the lock symbol next to our website. So that way our website has secure encryption with HTTPS instead of HTTP. So to see that we have the free SSL turned on, we can go to Marketplace on the left. Then once it brings us to the next page, we'll want to look for the add-ons link where it says Shop Add-ons, even though it's free. And then we'll scroll down to SSL certificates on the right. And then at the very top, we're going to see that Auto SSL is on, as we can see right here, because it says it's on and we only have the option to disable it. So it might just take a little bit for the SSL to kick in, but just to make sure that it does, what I'm going to recommend is to simply contact Bluehost's chat support. So just click the question mark in the upper right hand corner, and this will bring us to the support page, and I'm going to select chat, and I'll show you how quickly we can get a rep chatting with us here. So I'm going to put in my name, Drew, and then my domain name, drew-host.com, then hit next, and I'll just select tech support and then SSL. Then I'm going to write, hello, I have an HTML website I would like SSL added to. Can you do that for me? Question mark. Then hit find help and start chat. And then we'll just go down and hit start chat again because we don't want to look at the article resources. Okay, so now we have somebody joined. And then we're going to need to verify our account via email. So just wait for it. And then we'll need to check our email for that verification code. So I'm going to pull that up, and there is my verification token. And I'll just prove that it's me by sending him the token, and then he'll be able to help me with it. And I'm not going to leave the whole chat here on video because it took a couple of minutes, but Bluehost has really great chat and phone reps, so I'm sure they'll be able to help you get the SSL set up. And once they do, you'll be able to go over to your domain name with the lock symbol and SSL added, as you can see here on the agency theme, which is uploaded to the domain name I signed up for, drewhost.com. So that does it for the entire tutorial or course. Be sure to check out the resources page at w3newbie.com, which will also teach you how to set up your domain name email address with Bluehost and connect it to your Gmail account so you can get your domain name email there. I want to thank you for watching. Please remember to check out the complete 12 website bundle pack at w3newbie.com, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.